course, let's return to the story we began the program with an hour ago. Is power affordable in New Zealand? That's a question posed by the first phase of the electricity pricing review released today. It's 80 pages, it's online. It's worth a read if you're interested. The answer, it seems, is, well, it depends on who's getting the bill. For residential consumers or households, prices have risen nearly 80% since 1990. That's excluding inflation, by the way. In contrast, commercial prices have fallen by nearly 25% over the same period. Energy and Resources Minister Megan Woods says the report shows despite the increased competition in the energy retail market, and there is increased competition, those who can least afford to are paying the most for electricity.
I think this is one of the first reports that we've had produced that isn't just for energy insiders, that this is very much written with the end consumer in mind. And I think is a lot more accessible than a lot of the reports we get on the electricity markets, which tend to be quite technical and complicated. And I think this is a really accessible report. Some of the most striking elements in terms of the substance are the pricing, the percentage increase that we've seen since 1990. But I think the piece that really jumps out is the two-tier electricity market that the report's being developed here in New Zealand, which fits really neatly with what recent reports in the UK and Australia have also shown.
Yeah, can we look at the prices? And the figures on page 19 are critical, I think. Residential consumer prices rose at an average of 2.1% a year. So they were 79% higher in 2018 than they were in 1990. Commercial prices over the same period dropped by 24%. So residential prices up 79%, commercial prices down 24%. That's extraordinary. Why is that?
Well, I think one of the things the report does is pull that apart really well in terms of those residential and commercial prices, and it's one of the things that we're really looking for feedback as we head into phase two. There's several reasons. Some of them are explained in the report, such as some of our particularly big electricity users don't use the distribution network. They kind of get it a lot closer to the source, that they simply, plug straight into transmission for big electricity users. But that is certainly a question we want to tease out more as we go into phase two. That I think one of the things that we're seeing is that is a big shift between the two different groupings.
Yeah, and isn't that about the electricity companies trying harder to win big customers, and therefore there's far greater competition, which means that the sort of price cutting that Max Bradford promised in 1998 is actually taking place in the commercial realm. It's just not taking place in the domestic realm.
Well, I think one of the really interesting things that this report has found, I mean, you're absolutely right in terms of the commercial realm benefiting and the retail overall not benefiting to the same extent. But one of the interesting points that this report makes is that for some people, those most able to pay their power bills, actually, the market's working really well. They shop around, they switch, they pay their prices, they pay their power bills on time every time and get up to a 26% prompt payment discount. Much more likely to live in a newer, well-insulated home, may have put some solar panels on the roof, all those kind of things that mean that actually for some people the market is working well, and it could be that about 3% of your average income is being spent on electricity. But then we're seeing for some of our most vulnerable households that 10% is putting the 10% they're spending on energy is putting them into energy hardship.
Yeah, and let's turn to page 25 where this stuff is addressed. 6.1% of households, 103,000 households spent more than 10% of their income on domestic energy. And they are disproportionately likely to be households that can't afford to do that, and they are disproportionately likely to have children in those households, right?
That's right.
Okay, so this is a disaster for those households, that electricity is costing them so much.
Absolutely, and that was one of the drivers behind this report. This was, of course, the need for this review was something that we agreed to as part of our coalition agreement with New Zealand First, but it's something that all three parties of our government wanted to explore. What is it that's driving these prices, but importantly, what does it mean into the future as technology changes, and what do we need to be putting in place in terms of a plan so that we're ready for those changes and that we don't open up larger divides between the haves and the have-nots as we go forward. But you're absolutely right. Energy hardship is something our government is committed to addressing now as well as in the future. We've put in place things like the winter energy payment, and we've also increased subsidies for insulation, because we know that health outcomes are premised on people having warm, dry homes.
Yeah, if we look at Part 2, context, page 9, and we see that payments by consumers to electricity suppliers totalled $8.8 billion in the year to June 2017, $8.8 billion. The government got $1.7 billion of that, or 19%, as company tax, dividends and GST. In other words, on the one hand, you were saying, look, yes, the cost is too great, and yes, there are very serious consequences of that. On the other hand, you're earning $1.7 billion from the sector.
Yes, but we're also a government that looks at the other side of that ledger and asks what we're spending by the fact that people can't heat their houses properly. What are the health costs to us as a country? And that's the way we're viewing this. We see people being able to have warm, dry homes is absolutely critical to the well-being of our country, so that we're also looking at the costs involved with that and why it is that we've initiated this report. And this is very much the problem definition report.
Absolutely. And look, no one's saying these companies shouldn't pay tax, but the fact of the matter is that when people pay their bills, $1 in 5 roughly is going to the government.
Yes, and we're a government that's prepared to look at whether or not that's being shared equally and whether people are being charged fairly for their electricity. So that's not an issue for us. The fact that some of that revenue is coming back to government. We've made a commitment to have a look and to ensure that we're looking at all parts of our electricity sector, from the point that it's generated to the point that someone turns the kettle on their bench, to see where those costs are accumulating and where it is that we have to seek remedies to make sure people can afford to heat their homes.
I'd like to move on to something else, but just before we do, one final question on this. So this is a discussion document. It is the first report. When do you think that we will see some material responses to this that will lead directly to people who can't afford to pay huge sums of money for electricity not having to pay such great sums?
Well, submissions on the review are open through to the 23rd of October. The panel is looking at having a final report to us by May. I'll need to consider that. I'll need to discuss it with colleagues. I'll need to put it through cabinet processes. But look, we're not wanting to muck around with this. We're going to be looking very seriously at those remedies and what it is we need to do to fix things. This was a piece of work that we initiated right at the beginning of our government. It was underway before Christmas last year, getting the terms of reference drawn up, and the work begun on that. It's something that we've kind of leant into as a government because it's a priority for us.
Thanks, Minister. We really appreciate having you. Can I just ask you to change portfolios briefly? And the Natural Disaster Fund that you and I have discussed before on Checkpoint, which was over $6 billion in 2010. This is EQC's war chest, effectively the government's kitty for meeting the cost of natural disasters. $6 point something billion in 2010. Last time we spoke, it was less than 500 million and heading south. What is it now?
It's currently at 171 million, the latest advice I've heard, which I guess on the plus side shows that actually we're settling some claims.
Yeah, but on the non-plus side, on the minus side, you're running out of money.
Oh, look, this is something that we've always anticipated, as you've indicated. We've discussed this many times, that we've had the initiating letter from EQC that the Crown guarantee is going to be required. So that's something that we're prepared for as a government.
Okay, so what you are saying is the government is standing behind the Natural Disaster Fund, and if you need to write out a cheque, you will.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what we've said consistently from the very beginning that we got into government, that we've known this day was coming, that we've been openly discussing this with EQC. I think I've talked about it with you several times. And look, we're gearing up in Q1 next year that we'll probably need to initiate that Crown guarantee.
We're still trying to work out what we don't know, right, in Christchurch, and that is the stuff that the scopes missed first time round, the damage that people don't even know they've got. Where are Treasury at with their projections around those figures? What do you think is the extent of your liability that people don't yet even know about? And I guess on-solds is the most obvious example. We looked at that with the Christchurch homeowner last night. Do you have some figures around what that might be yet?
Look, no update since last time we talked about this. That what we do know is that in terms of the Natural Disaster Fund, in terms of what we've paid out, and what we're seeing in terms of the 3,600 that we've got there in terms of the repairs. So we're gearing up to be able to meet those. As you know, that we've got some very broad estimates from Treasury, but what I'm most interested in is working through those claims and getting them settled and seeing what they actually are. Because I think for a number of years that we've been dealing in hypotheticals and theoreticals in Christchurch, what I'm most interested is us getting actually action and seeing claims settled.
Megan Woods ending the interview in her capacity as EQC Minister.